Welcome back to Trust Your Eyes. Round 18 saw 3 of the top 4 sides entering the round lose, while there are just 2 games separating 2nd and 13th. But we have to start on Friday night. Geelong just kept holding off Collingwood the entire game in what was a high pressure and fumbly affair. Is the biggest story Geelong winning 3 in a row, or is it Collingwood losing 3 in a row? I think a lot of people are probably going to expect that I say Collingwood, but I'm going to focus on the positive in Geelong, who have made massive strides tactically in the past few weeks. And Chris Scott, again, I think he's the best coach in the competition, and he's proving that yet again. They've freed up Tom Stewart, playing him at centre bounce, but he's still going back in defence. Now, I haven't watched it closely enough to see what percentage of time is actually in the midfield and in defence, or is it maybe just what Tom Stewart feels like in the moment. But whatever they're doing, it's working really well. And how important is Patrick Dangerfield? His dynamic, it just changes the entire team, his explosiveness, his speed. He can't do it for 120 minutes like he once could, but him in there just changes their entire midfield complexity. And the big elephant in the room is Tom Hawkins. Since he's been out of the side, they've won 3 in a row and the forward line looks really good. A little smaller with Gary Rowan in there, pretty much as his like-for-like replacement. It's working out well. And even Sam De Koning, who I wasn't sure about as a ruckman, the dynamic between him and Blitzsavs is working out really well. And quickly on the Pies, they just don't have enough soldiers, which I think is feeding into maybe the lack of hunger and pressure we're seeing at times. So you think if they lose this week against Hawthorn, they're just about out of it. The standalone Saturday afternoon game was a thriller. The Western Bulldogs replied to every Carlton punch in a goal-for-goal affair. Patrick Cripps' early burst in the last quarter got the Blues momentum, but Charlie Curnow could only manage 3 goals and 7 behinds. Out of 10, what level of concern should Carlton fans have after back-to-back losses? I'm going to say Carlton fans should have a concern level of 5 out of 10, because a lot of their game is still in pretty good order. For the positives, I think Curnow and Mackay and Lobb and Buku Karmas in defence got a lot of shots, and if Curnow kicks 6 goals 4, they probably win the game, although Buku did a relatively good job of making his shots as difficult as possible, as a lot of them were kind of 50 metres out and a little bit on an angle. But the big concern is the midfield, which is their strength, but it's also their weakness. They're just conceding a lot of goals from centre bounce and stoppages, especially in their forward 50, and the last 2 weeks have proven that. And against the Western Bulldogs, I think they kicked 4 goals from centre bounce clearance, which is a lot, and that was basically the difference in the game. They are also well in the bottom half for points against, which is bizarre because their defence on paper looks strong, but they do have to fix a few things up. I think they are fixable, so I still like Carlton at this stage. It was a great win for the Dogs. Adam Treloar laid out back against the wall, and with no Norton and O'Donnell, they were able to get an important win, but it's still hard to get a read on them, so I'll probably have more to say about the Bulldogs next week after they play the Cats at the Cattery. Saturday night was the other pivotal game of the round. The wet conditions lasted the majority of the night as Melbourne held back a late comeback by Essendon to win by 17 points. Melbourne have won 3 of their last 4 games and look back to their contested best. Are you buying that they are quote-unquote back? I'm going to say Melbourne are back, but there is a catch. They're back to their old selves. I think that Fremantle game where they got belted by 90 plus points was the changing point. They were trying to play a little more cute football, kick mark, build up play, but they've scrapped it and they've gone back to what they know how to do best, and that's the 2 words Simon Goodwin always says, contest and defence. And when you have May and Lever and Stuart Viney and Oliver at 70%, you're always a shot to beat the best sides in the competition, and they did. I think the wet conditions also helped them far more than an Essendon side, which I think overall has a little more skill. I still think in the grand scheme of things, Melbourne aren't a threat to win the premiership. I think the forward line's still weak. They'll get Max Gawn back. And I think they can play around with Van Rooyen in the ruck, who was really impressive. But Petty, Turner, they have their moments, but they're not good enough in preliminary finals and grand finals. So I think Melbourne are back to their old selves, but I still don't think they're good enough to win the premiership. Essendon just couldn't adjust. When it was dry early on, they were pretty dominant. They were the better side. But as soon as that light rain came and made the ball a bit more wet and slippery. They just didn't adjust quick enough, like Brad Scott said in his press conference. And now it sets up a really important home game against Adelaide at Marvel on the Friday night. Hawthorn's last quarter performance got them a win against Fremantle, while the Gold Coast Suns held a constant 2 or 3 goal lead over Port Adelaide in their win. Which of the winning teams impressed you the most? Well, Gold Coast were really good in their home win against Port Adelaide. They're still undefeated at home and it's becoming a real fortress for them, but I'm going to focus on Hawthorn because I thought their midfield beat a really good young midfield in Fremantle. You could say the best clearance midfield the Dockers have. I know Sean Darcy wasn't there, but Luke Jackson was still pretty good. I thought it came down to the last quarter, pretty even in the first half. Freo had the better of the play in the third quarter, but Hawthorn, through some tactical genius by Sam Mitchell, putting James Sicily forward, swapping Weddle back into defence, and just he kept switching things up and really had Fremantle on their toes. And what made this really impressive is I thought Fremantle were very good themselves. They're a tough side, always hard to play against. They have a horrible record in Tasmania, and for the game to be so close for the majority of the match was really good by Fremantle, I thought. And we have to focus on Hawthorn's ruck, Lloyd Meek, who used to play for Fremantle. He was really pivotal in their win. That tap to Newcombe in the last quarter set up the goal of the game. Again, I thought Jackson was good, but I reckon Meek beat him. He was really important for Hawthorn. They're flying. They're still in the hunt for top 8. And it was a really impressive win against another very good side in Fremantle. For a bit of a switch up, Brisbane's win over West Coast at Optus Oval moves them up to 4th. But who could ignore Lachie Neale's 34 touches and 2 goals? In the last 6 weeks, he has shot up in Brownlow calculations. Is he a serious threat to win a 3rd Brownlow and back-to-back? If you ask me right now, not only is he in the mix, but I've got Neale as the front runner to steam home and take the award for a 3rd time. He perfectly fits the criteria needed for Brownlow vote getting, which is what the award's about. It's not necessarily being the best player. It's just about how many votes you can pick up. And you can't tell me he doesn't tick all these boxes. He's in a winning team. He's a strong polling past. No one else from the Lions is going to take a lot of votes. Dunkley hasn't been a great vote getter. McCluggage is pretty average. And they're not going to give votes to Zorko or Big Oscar McInerney, who've been their other influential players. He's got a great run home. I can't see a lot of tags. And it's been surprising that we've seen the tag come back. But besides Marcus Windhager against St Kilda, he hasn't really been tagged much this year. And I actually think even if he polls another 25 plus Brownlow votes, which is looking likely, that Lachie Neale, in terms of the Brownlow as the award by itself, is the greatest poller we have ever seen, because I think he fits that criteria, and it feels like he's gotten 25 plus votes for like the past 4 or 5 years. It's unheard of. He's a fantastic player, and clearly the umpires love him, and I think they're going to love him again this year, and he's a big shot to win the award. Sydney bounced back, thumping North Melbourne by 79 points, and Adelaide, in another wet game on Saturday, beat St Kilda by 32 points. What are a couple quick takeaways from each match? I think for the first game, Logan McDonald with 4 goals was really good to see. He's still a young key forward, and after missing a couple shots in the past 2 weeks in Sydney losses, to see him bounce back and be their main forward target was really good. And then Parker and Mills both getting a goal each was fantastic. Parker was one of the best players on the field when he came on as the sub, and Mills was playing on the wing, so that will be interesting to see if he stays there or goes back in defence or on ball. But to see those 2 guys back was important for Sydney. And then in the other game, Riley Thilthorpe's the story. He came on the sub in the last quarter, had 7 disposals and kicked 2 goals for Adelaide with his big hulking frame and that big beard. It'll be good to get some games into him in the back half of this year, and maybe he can really explode next year and be one of the best players in the competition. And for St Kilda, they got a young gun of their own in Mateus Philippou, who has had back-to-back games on ball and been really good, 20 plus touches and a goal against the Crows, who are pretty solid in the midfield. He's showing a lot of signs after playing in the reserves, and I think St Kilda fans should be happy that he's playing AFL right now. Looking forward to next week, Pick the 3 most important games and rank them in order from 1 to 3. Well, there's another 4 or 5 really good games, as there seem to be every round, but number 1 has to be Hawthorn and Collingwood for a few reasons. Now, it's a Hawthorn home game, which is kind of a shame because it means Jack Ginnivan will face Collingwood at the MCG. He faced them already at Adelaide Oval, but wasn't quite the same, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And the loser of the game will be a little bit behind the pack, and unless they get on a really hot streak, you think their finals chances would be very slim. And number 2, I've got Brisbane and Sydney. Now, the Swans have been the best side all year, and Brisbane's the hottest team right now on a 6-game win streak. And they meet at the Gabba. If Sydney win, it just about wraps up first place for them. If Brisbane win, then they're a good shot for second and another home final in the top 4. But if they lose, they'll be back with the pack, so it's a very important game. And third, I'm going with Essendon and Adelaide. It feels like every week Essendon are under the pump, and this is a team they should be beating at home just to relieve some of that heat, put them back up in the top 4 hopefully for them, and keep those teams from 8th to 13th still a game and a half away from them. Thanks for listening to Trust Your Eyes for round 18. Good luck to all your teams, and I'll be back soon.